It's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This year, Queens Public Library joins our nation in paying homage to the visionaries and trailblazers who have shaped AANHPI history, made lasting contributions to our country, and continue to influence our collective future. Join us for our special programs and enjoy our book recommendations, resources, and much more at queenslib.org/AANHPI. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and QPL is joining the national movement to bring awareness to mental health and to fight the stigma that surrounds it. We're also offering programs, workshops, and resources designed to help teens build the coping strategies that will assist them now and in the future. Visit queenslibrary.org to learn more. New York City's libraries are facing massive budget cuts. These cuts would force QPL to end Saturday service at most of our branches, reduce our classes and programs, carry fewer books and library materials, and postpone necessary repairs. We need your help. Visit queenslib.org/take action and send a message to your elected officials today.
Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf. Who's afraid of Virginia?
It's easy to talk about Warner Brothers' new motion picture, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? It's hard to tell about it. Easy to talk about. All you have to say is Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton.
Who's afraid of Virginia?
He's the associate professor of history. She's his wife. The essence of Ivy League charm to students and friends who don't know them well. George Siegel, Sandy Dennis are the newcomers led by their charming host and hostess to the hell that hides behind those ivy-clad university walls.
Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Early in the morning. Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf. Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Edward Albee wrote the play, the most acclaimed work by this controversial author. Ernest Lehman wrote the screenplay. He did the same for West Side Story and Sound of Music. Mike Nichols directs. His unbroken series of theatrical triumphs have given him a position without peer or rival. All you have to say is Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, George Siegel, Sandy Dennis, Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. After that, all you can say is incredible.
Good evening. I'm Taylor Prudy, and welcome to Culture Connection. Culture Connection, if you've never been here before, is curated by Daniel Zaleski, and it is now in its 11th year at the Queens Public Library. And we are proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters in disciplines that include music, theater, author talks, and film. And tonight's is an author talk about film. Now we've expanded into this virtual format, and Culture Connection can be seen all around the world. Tonight in particular, we have Philip Gefter, whose new book is Cocktails with George and Martha, Movies, Marriage, and the Making of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And Michael Schulman, the New Yorker writer and author of the acclaimed Oscar Wars, an insider look at the select few battles for Hollywood's favorite little gold man. Hey guys, how you doing tonight?
Hi there.
Hi, Taylor. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. And I'm glad that, I think the last time you were here, I'd said that it's nice to be able to combine the movie history side with the literary, and so that we've got both of you is a real treat. And I know, Michael, you have a bunch of movie nerd questions for Phil. But
I'm a movie and a theater nerd, so I got both.
Well,
Perfect.
okay, then let's.
And
Then
I have my cocktail poured, so I'm prepared.
Cocktails with Michael and Philip.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
just like Ed would have wanted. Okay, well, I think my first question before you guys get into it is just this Oscar year particularly was kind of seminal. So seminal that you almost didn't feel the need to cover it in your book, if I remember correctly, because it's such an important moment in the culture wars of the 60s into the new Hollywood. Is that kind of fair to say?
Well, my book covers like one Oscar year pretty much every decade. And for the 60s, I chose like the movies of 1969, which was like the Midnight Cowboy, Easy Rider year. This particular year, 1967, when Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf got 13 nominations, I don't know. To me, it was not as much of a juicy Oscar year. It's a juicy movie, and that's why I love this book so much. But it was up against. Let's see what the nominees were.
In the year of the
The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, The Sand Pebbles, and A Man for All Seasons, which won. Philip, tell us what the results were.
Uh-oh. Well, Man for All Seasons won Best Director and Best Actor. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf was nominated for 13 Academy Awards and won 5. Elizabeth Taylor won for Martha, the role of Martha. Sandy Dennis won for the role of Honey, Best Supporting Actor. Haskell Wexler won for Best Cinematography. Irene Sharaff won for Best Costume, and I forgot the 5th.
Design award, was it production design or something? But it also lost Best Picture to A Man for All Seasons.
Yes, right.
They're both based on plays, but I feel like this was one of those years when the Academy went with a safer choice. Whatever Man for All Seasons had to say about however it spoke to the moment, it spoke to it through the metaphor of history, while as we'll talk about, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is showing the audience the present in a very risque, groundbreaking way.
Right. I mean, that it even got that far was phenomenal. Aside from it being a phenomenon.
Well, I have to tell you, Phil, I just loved this book so much. This is my favorite kind of book, which is kind of a cultural history that takes one kind of iconic film or moment or whatever, and it has this combustible cast of characters, and also sort of captures something larger about the era in which it entered and changed.
Yeah.
And it's just delicious. There's so much to love about this book.
Thank you.
And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you came to this topic and how you first discovered Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf yourself.
Right. I guess I like to say that I came to it because I had a front row seat to my parents' marriage, and when I saw it when I was 15, when it first came out. I asked my parents if I could see it. They said, "Well, you're not going to understand it." I saw it. I didn't really understand it, but what it did do is it was the first time I had ever seen a movie that reflected reality back to me in a way that seemed true and recognizable. I recognized my parents in it. I recognized the parents of friends of mine in it, and it sort of tapped, I guess, what I later came to understand as a kind of fault line in marriage, and basically hypocrisy. I think it ultimately, fundamentally addressed the hypocrisy of the era. So that all of that, I see, was germinating. And you know, when I was trying to figure out what to write, you know, I was looking at the cultural markers of my childhood or my youth, you know, which of them endured, you know, which movie, which of the movies, the books, the music, all of that. And every time I thought of movies, and this has always been true in my entire life, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf kind of surfaced as one of the first movies I ever thought of. And so it became ripe for me as an idea to start to write about. And, you know, but writing about a movie alone, you know, does not make a book necessarily. But as I started thinking about it, and I thought Edward Albee, who was a god when I was in college, and you know, he was the father of the theater of the absurd. He was interesting. You know, Mike Nichols was eminently interesting. And then the Burtons, the most famous couple in the world. And as I started to piece together, you know, this combination of characters, each of whom, you know, could have books written about them, and they have, I thought it became more interesting to me. And then when I started thinking about the phenomenon of the play, it was radical, it was shocking, it was successful, and that was a phenomenon in and of itself. And then the movie, you know, came out in 1966. It's sort of right on the cusp of the cultural tumult of the 60s. And I think it both kind of anticipated and precipitated like some of that. So all of that became kind of ripe for my curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, it's, to me, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is one of those things that have become so familiar as part of our culture. And yet the more you think about it, the more strange and unlikely it is that this is one of our classics. I mean, starting even from the title, it's a very unusual title. It's basically a pun.
Yes.
Can you tell the story of just how Edward Albee came upon
Yes.
the title?
So Edward Albee lived in Greenwich Village in the 50s, and one day he walked into a neighborhood bar and ordered a beer. And behind the bar was a mirror on which people, you know, just kind of wrote graffiti, wrote little things, sayings, whatever. And, you know, given that it was Greenwich Village and kind of bohemian, it was, you know, the things on the mirror were more ironic than they were salacious. And there it was, like on the bottom of the mirror, written out in kind of dried chalk, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? No one knows the author of that little quip. But, you know, there it was. And he kind of thought, you know, this is clever. You know, here's a little nursery rhyme, you know, that alludes to a famous author, like a well-known author. And so he just kind of stored it away in his memory. And it didn't surface for another 6 years until he started writing a play that he called The Exorcism. It was his first 2-act play. And as it got longer and as he was writing, it became 3 acts. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf came to him, and that was going to be the title of the 3rd act. And then it eventually rose to be the title of the play.
You know, I watching the trailer that we just watched, I wonder if people notice that when Elizabeth Taylor sings the title, she doesn't actually sing the tune of Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf from the Three Little Pigs. Now, that's a little Easter egg that I only picked up on because I read your book. But tell us why she doesn't. Yeah,
I mean, that's a really good little detail. So they didn't want to pay for the use of the song or the melody Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And so it turns out that I think, oh God, I'm blocking his name, but the producer, one of the 2 producers of the play, realized that Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush would suffice as a tune for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And it was in the public domain. So they didn't have to pay for the rights to the song. And that's how it came to be. And that's how she sings the song, or sings the melody.
So does that mean that every time anyone puts on the play, they have to sing da 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 instead of da 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 da?
Well, I think that just to be safe, yes, because they probably, I mean, I assume the rights, I mean, that was 60 years ago. So I don't know if the rights have changed or if they're still in the hands of the copyright. I just don't know.
Well, Mickey Mouse just entered the public domain, so I feel like it's only a matter of time.
It's only a matter of time.
Our way up to it, and that's going to be a huge sea change for that. your book goes through, there are a lot of sort of warring couples or tense couples who sort of pop into this book. And you talk about some of the real life or kind of almost real life couples, imagined couples who sort of filtered their way into George and Martha. Can you tell us a little bit about who some of them are?
Well, sure. I mean, I can start with Dick and Liz, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, to begin with. They were notorious. I mean, they when they met, they were each married to other people. So their affair on the set of Cleopatra became an international sensation, and they were known intermittently on headlines for almost a year. Liz and Dick, Le Scandal, Le Scandal, and so they come with this baggage. Of both equal parts glamour and scandal, but they were known to, just fight in public and fight with each other, and they had kind of a mercurial relationship. And so when they were cast as George and Martha, it seemed like they were like a perfect couple to play George and Martha. And what's so interesting, and I write about this, I call it a kind of prismatic verisimilitude that they bring to their roles. That there are moments when I, having seen the movie so many times at this point, I can tell when Richard Burton is speaking to Elizabeth Taylor, even as he is as George and she is Martha. And there are times when she will, in real life, they will have these big arguments, and afterwards she'll say, "Oh, that wasn't me. That was just Martha. I was just being Martha," in real life. So that's one couple in the book. The other is Mike Nichols and Ernest Lehman. Mike Nichols, the director, and Ernest Lehman, the producer. Well, these two guys I call their relationship they kind of enacted this psychological vaudeville, throughout the production of the film. They were both, very ambitious, Jewish men from New York who were, ambitious, competitive, kind of at each other in various ways, but they were very civilized. So it was all, kind of Machiavellian and manipulative. And so the way that Mike Nichols, this is a really good example of what one of the things Mike did. And it was actually to the benefit of the entire production. Ernest Lehman was a first-time producer, but a well-known and highly accomplished screenwriter. He had written North by Northwest, Sabrina, Executive Suite, various other movies. And he was older than Mike Nichols. So he wrote a screenplay for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. He wrote 6 versions of it. And Mike, when he got to Hollywood and he read the screenplay, I guess for the second time, or the second version, decided that it was his intent to strip away the screenplay back to Albee's original script. And I think this is actually Mike Nichols' integrity. I think that he had a kind of moral compass. He recognized, the brilliance of Albee's play and Albee's dialogue. And so, but the way he went about it, was very manipulative, and it's worth reading my book because it's sort of laugh out loud funny at times. How he manipulated Mike Nichols, Ernest Lehman, so that he did bring the screenplay back to the original Albee script, and but not without a lot of angst in the process. If you don't mind my digressing one more little bit, when Edward Albee finally saw the film, they flew him out to LA to see an early version of it before it was released. And of course, Ernest Lehman gets a big screenwriting credit at the beginning of the film. And at the end, he complained, he said, every line in this film is mine, fucking word for word. And he was reacting to the fact that Ernest Lehman got the screenwriting credit when it should have gone to Edward Albee, even though that was not in the contract. But so Mike Nichols, actually, that was one of the other things that he did that I think make the film as good as it is. But that has to do with and their dynamic. They were a couple in my book, certainly.
Yeah, and so much of the sourcing for the book seems to come from Ernest Lehman's very detailed journal that he kept during this
Yeah.
time. Did you know it existed before you started the book?
No, I didn't, and that was just like a research gold mine for me. That was just,
Where is it? Tell me about like finding it.
so I was writing the proposal for this book, and I was doing research online, and I sort of vaguely knew, or I discovered as I was writing the proposal, that Ernest Leeman's papers are at the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas in Austin. It's a very good archive. I mean, amazing.
Oh, best. I mean,
and so, but only when I started going through the finding, whatever it's called.
the finding aid.
Thank you. I know this is sponsored by a library. It's the finding aid.
Library term.
Then I realized that I saw that there was a production journal for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So I called them. I'm in the library. I said, like, qu'est-ce que c'est? And they said, well, actually, he kept a production journal, and for the full year of production, and it had been under lock and key until it had been released 3 months before my call.
Oh my God!
Amazing. And what he did,
his heart is palpitating.
I was just like, oh my God, that was amazing. So so what he did, like in terms of keeping this production journal, he would every evening he would get into his Cadillac sedan and drive to Brentwood from the studio, and he brought a dictaphone, like a kind of portable dictaphone. He would dictate the day into the dictaphone, literally, and he was very meticulous and actually really, really thorough. And the next morning, handed to his secretary to type out and make a typescript. So he was incredibly rigorous and methodical in terms of keeping track of everything that went on. I mean, he would. I mean, I don't know if this is relevant, but I could read two paragraphs from the book from his journal that give you a sense of the journal, and it also gives you a sense of the Burtons' like unbelievable privilege. All right, do you mind? Did I sell you? It's good. I think this is good. I think it's brief. All right. One afternoon, Ernie paid a visit to Elizabeth in her dressing room. Richard was there too, and a Pekingese dog, and we spent a very pleasant hour of conversation over a vodka and tonic, Leeman reported in his journal. It was one of the nicest times that we had, at least that I've had with Richard on this picture. Perhaps the vodka helped. Elizabeth was wearing a double rope of large pearls around her neck and made a point of explaining that Marty Ransohoff, her producer on The Sandpiper, had given her the necklace at lunch earlier in the day, a way to thank her again for starring in the film. The wonderful thing about Elizabeth is that she loves jewels so much that she makes even a stingy man like me want to buy her jewelry just to watch the thrill on her face, Richard said. It was a natural segue for the Burtons to point out, first one and then the other, that Ernie, as the producer, had yet to pay homage to Elizabeth with the gift of jewels, even though they had been shooting for several weeks. The Burtons went on to tell Ernie that they had never met anyone quite like him at Hollywood. We think you're so different than other Hollywood producers, Elizabeth said. You're so Brooks Brothers. When he told her he got his clothes at Dick Carroll's, she said, no, not your clothes, Ernie. You've got a sort of Brooks Brothers mind and intelligence. While suggesting he was a cut above other Hollywood moguls, it was a backhanded compliment. Brooks Brothers, the epitome of Ivy League convention, was considered nothing if not square. In his journal, Ernie reported that as he left, he turned to Richard and deadpanned. You can tell Elizabeth to give the string of pearls back to the props department now that she has made her point. Richard merely smiled. So I mean, aside from that, was just his reporting that part of the day, which is amazing. But it also talks about, it speaks to Elizabeth's addiction to jewelry. And
I have to say, part of reading the book, I kept telling myself, the gifts that are described in this book are so over the top. Like every time Elizabeth Taylor arrived in a new place, they'd have to give her like 10,000 orchids. Like it's just nuts when you read about the gifts that people were giving, especially Liz and Dick, just to keep them happy. They were treated like,
royalty.
And it made me curious to ask a little bit about sort of the fact of their star power. Obviously that helped get the movie made, but it also made the movie very difficult to make. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about how sort of Nichols and Lehman and all these people had to sort of deal with the phenomenon of Liz and Dick?
Yes, I will. So here's an anecdote, kind of a very apt anecdote. So one morning, just after they started shooting, Elizabeth was having, in the morning, it's like 11 o'clock, 10:30. Elizabeth's, she can't quite get to Martha's voice. And this is another story that's really important. You know, Elizabeth was 32 years old, the most famous woman in the world, the most beautiful woman in the world, playing a 50-ish menopausal woman who's sort of like at the end of her tether, I mean, sort of coming apart at the seams, you know. So she had to gain 20 pounds. She had to wear some prosthetics. They had to give her a grayish wig. And she had to lower her voice 2 octaves. And so she would complain about that periodically, you know, like, it's hurting my diaphragm, you know, I have to take a day off. But so this one morning, she's not able to reach the voice. And Mike Nichols is coaxing her, and her husband, who was kind of in a mentorial role, Richard Burton, because he was a Shakespearean actor, was berating her, and she burst into tears and stormed off the set. And of course, Richard Burton followed. So everyone, I mean, all the crew, you know, is waiting, you know, like the clock is ticking, you know, the meter's running. They wait for the Burtons. No Burtons after an hour. It's lunchtime. Everyone goes to lunch. They come back. No Burtons. 3 o'clock. No Burtons. 4 o'clock. No Burtons. A whole day has gone by. Finally, at 4:30, the Burtons saunter back onto the set, laughing, jovial, with another couple in tow. And they introduce the Duke and Duchess of Windsor to Mike Nichols, with whom they had just had lunch. So there is their privilege, their kind of the hegemony of their fame, kind of distorting the daily process of producing this movie.
Yeah, it's so interesting how you describe the way that there are 2 things at work that I think give the movie a kind of electricity in terms of Liz and Dick. One is that, as you said, they were kind of cast as themselves, like in type, as a married couple who are very tumultuous with each other. And at the same time, both of them are cast against type, because Elizabeth Taylor's playing this sort of older, haggard, you know, harridan, and Richard Burton, who was known for being very virile, is playing this kind of, you know, this professor who is totally dominated by, you know, his wife most of the time,
right.
Kind of a loser whose masculinity is constantly in question. I feel like those 2 things working against each other, it just gives the movie that little something. And it makes me want to hear more about like the would have beens, like in terms of casting.
Oh, right. Yes, exactly.
Who else was considered, who almost had it, who turned it down? Like, if it wasn't Liz and Dick, who would it might have been?
Right. So it was Ernest Lehman's idea to cast Elizabeth Taylor, but he made this list of potential Marthas: Ingrid Bergman, not Ingmar, Ingrid Bergman, Uta Hagen, Nancy Kelly, Anne Bancroft, Patricia Neal, Shelley Winters, Betty Davis, Deborah Kerr, Geraldine Page, and Vivica Lindfors. Only he knew that this was his B list. Like, he wanted Elizabeth Taylor from the beginning, and he kept that a secret for a while because he knew all the arguments that everybody would give him to try to talk him out of that. But he was intent. And so, you know, actually Richard Burton came with the package of Elizabeth Taylor. Like, she insisted that her husband play George. Ernest Lehman had already offered the role to Glenn Ford and to Jack Lemmon, both of whom turned it down because each of them thought that it would destroy their career to play George in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. That's what life was like then. Anyway, so what's so amazing, and I attribute this to Mike Nichols. I mean, this is the second thing that he did that was really kind of brilliant, is, you know, they both were, you know, Elizabeth Taylor was Elizabeth Taylor. She was gorgeous, you know, 32. And he really brought her up to the character, you know, and it took a lot of work and a lot of patience, but he was intent on bringing her to that role. And by turns, Richard Burton, who is a force of nature, you know, and just ferocious on the screen and on the stage, had to be tamped down. And so Mike Nichols did this balancing act, so that like he brought them both kind of to the temperature of their characters. And that was no small feat. And you realize this is where it's kind of this part of the prismatic verisimilitude I like to talk about, is that, they clearly were acting, they were performing. I mean, even though they were, kind of George and Martha-ish in real life, they were both playing, opposite type. And that's kind of, it's so kind of miraculous. I mean, they both deserved the Oscar, even though he didn't win,
And didn't Edward Albee have a dream cast as well that he didn't get for the movie?
Yes. So when Jack Warner bought the rights to Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, he made a gentleman's agreement with Edward Albee, who wanted James Mason and Bette Davis to play George and Martha. And so Albee sort of understood that it was a gentleman's agreement because he knew that it was Hollywood, and he would joke to his friends, they'll probably cast Rock Hudson and Doris Day, and but kind of he was disparagingly, he would say that, and ironically. The truth is Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton weren't that far afield when you consider both Doris Day and Rock Hudson were also the most famous movie stars at that moment. And so were Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, so they were, Dick and Liz were very Hollywood. But he really wanted Bette Davis. And I still to this day don't quite understand how, although she would be a great Martha, how would she say what a dump and then ask George, like, oh, that Bette Davis movie, she was in. And I don't know how that would, I don't know how that would work. But
I think there's a line, either you say this in the book or someone's quoted saying it. I don't remember, saying like, you can imagine exactly what Bette Davis's Martha would be like, but Elizabeth Taylor has more of like a mystique around it. Like, how could she pull this off? What is it going to be like? That maybe drew people to the theater.
Ernest Lehman said that. I mean, he would defend his, intent to cast her by saying that. Because everybody else thought, yeah, Bette Davis too would be an ideal Martha, but he said that she would bring a kind of mystique. And just when you see the trailer, they really promoted the Elizabeth Taylor and the Richard Burton-ness of the film in the trailer. They used it, and anyway. So yes, that was an Ernest Lehman.
What was the discussion around bringing any of the Broadway cast? Obviously not for the leads, but was there a discussion of bringing like the other professors? Was there any crossover from
George Segal and Sandy Dennis?
Yeah.
Mike basically cast them. Elizabeth had approval. First of all, Elizabeth Taylor brought Mike to the production. It was her idea for him to be the director. And she and Mike Nichols was initially good friends with Richard Burton. They had both performed on Broadway at the same time, not in the same play or on the same stage, but they became very good friends. And when Richard Burton was cast to play Mark Antony in Cleopatra in Rome, he invited Mike Nichols to come spend a week with them, mostly to babysit Elizabeth, because this was after their affair had come forward and the paparazzi were driving her crazy. So he spent a week in Rome, walking around Rome with Elizabeth Taylor, and he told her, to put on a babushka and wear sunglasses and nobody would recognize her. And so they became very good friends. And when Mike Nichols learned that she was cast to play Martha, he called her agent and said, I want to direct that film. And she loved the idea. So what she did was, this will answer your question, Sarah Taylor. What she did was she surrounded herself with people she trusted because she was so insecure about the role. So Mike Nichols was both a good friend, and she trusted him and knew that he knew what he was doing, and Richard Burton. So she had approval of Nick and Honey, and Mike took her to see George Segal in something he was on Broadway at the time, or off Broadway, and also Sandy Dennis. And Sandy Dennis was kind of a hard sell, you know, for the Hollywood suits. I mean, she's a very quirky, idiosyncratic kind of actress. And, you know, she had, on the surface, she has a kind of Hitchcock blonde quality, but her mouth and she's kind of horsey and ethereal. And so, but Elizabeth loved the fact that she would play Honey, because she was no threat whatsoever on the screen. So anyway, that's how that came to be.
I mean, Mike Nichols is such an interesting character at this moment because it was his first film, and yet he was very young, and yet he had this clout because he was this phenomenon who came, you know, Nichols and May and their comedy act. And then he was just directing hit after hit after hit on Broadway. And he was just kind of this comer. One of the things that he insisted on that I feel like he only got because of all that clout and a lot of fighting for it was shooting the film in black and white, which, you know, this was during a period where in a lot of movies, you know, there was still black and white, but they were increasingly color. Why did he want to do that? And what did it take to achieve that?
So yes, color had just kind of, color technology was relatively new in the mid 60s, and more movies were being made in color, and there was this new dazzling technology, Technicolor and Wonder Vision. I'm making that up, but something like that. And so this is what he said about it. Here's a quote. I love this quote. He says, "Here's the thing about black and white. It's not literal. It's a metaphor automatically. And that's the point. A movie is a metaphor. If it's in black and white, the film is already saying, no, this is not life. This is something about life." So he liked the kind of parallel quality of black and white, where it seems completely realistic, but it removes you just enough so that there's a level of abstraction, you know, that enables you to kind of enter. And the other thing that I had only thought about this later, and I'll talk about in a minute about the trials and the arguments he had. But Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is a difficult film and a difficult play. It's not easy to watch. You know, it's, you know, Edward Albee he was frustrated on Broadway during the rehearsals because the director didn't get the comedic aspects of it. And so he would, Edward Albee would say, like, humor, funny humor. And while it isn't a comedy, the dialogue is very witty, and Mike Nichols understood that and brought that forward. And so you are, laughing out loud one minute and gasping in kind of psychological horror the next. And it keeps you on this like tightrope, emotional tightrope throughout the entire film. Well, I think if it were in color, that might have been diffused, or black and white was a way to separate the audience enough so that they could actually like digest what they were watching. So that's my theory. But Jack Warner would like pull these pranks, just kind of hideous, pranks on Mike Nichols and Ernest Lehman, where he would agree to it being in black and white, but then he would send the Harry Stradling, who was the cinematographer before he was fired. They would send Harry Stradling to Mike and say, why don't we just shoot it in color, but we'll print it in black and white. And so that was, a ruse, because obviously, it was a way for them to shoot it in color, and then Jack Warner could make all these excuses for it to be in color. And then, Jack Warner would say, well, I really want it to be in black and white, but New York says no. New York being, kind of the suits. However, Jack Warner was the head suit. It was his studio, not his vice president in charge of sales or anything like that. So he was always trying to, make these excuses. And Mike, because of his clout, he was 33 years old, first-time director. He comes from New York to Hollywood. He has such hauteur. As an auteur, he's such hauteur because he, like in New York, he had just had 3 huge successes on Broadway. He had won a Tony. He knew everybody. He was a bold-faced name. his best friends were Leonard Bernstein, Stephen Sondheim, Susan Sontag, Richard Avedon. So like he goes to Hollywood with all of this kind of intellectual and creative heft. And it's a David and Goliath relationship. He's David, and he goes in to, I mean, he will just walk into Jack Warner's office. You know, nobody does that. Nobody did that then. You know, but he knew that, and it's at one point, this what the last argument, it was probably 3 or 4 times they had to go into Jack Warner's office, Mike and Ernie, to convince Ernie that it had to be in black, to convince Jack that it had to be in black and white. And this last time, you know, Mike said, okay, if it's going to be in color, I'll go back to New York. I don't care. I don't have to make this movie. I have a career. And, you know, and he was serious, you know, and Jack Warner knew it. And Jack Warner knew that if Mike left, you know, his relationship to the Burtons would leave. So and Mike understood his power.
Okay. While we're talking about Mike Nichols' fancy friends, we have to hear about how this movie got past the censorship office, the production code, as well as how this film contributed to the disintegration of the production code.
Yes.
The long-standing, three decade long kind of censorship apparatus for Hollywood.
Right. Good segue. So at the end of the production, at the end of they completed filming, and Mike alienated quite a few people. I mean, he, you know, for all of his brilliance, and he could be incredibly like erudite and hilarious and all of that, he could be a shit, you know. And so he burned enough bridges so that there was one last straw. He fired Alex North on his own. Alex North was the composer, and wanted to bring in Andre Previn, his good friend. And he had been wanting to do this for months. And, you know, he was always machinations to try to get, you know, Andre Previn to be the composer. And so he did this last minute thing, and it was just too much. And so Jack Warner fired him, and it was in the middle of editing. And Mike said, I have to edit my own film, or with Sam Osteen, who was the editor, but he worked very directly with him. And Mike said, I'll make a deal with you, Jack. If you let me finish editing the film, I will bring Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy to the production code screening, and we will seat ourselves right behind the Monsignor, who's the head of the Catholic, whatever it's called, league that determined whether you could use, you know, goddamn and all these curse words. And we will be seated right behind him. And when the film ends, she will turn to me and she will say, Jack would have loved this. Jack being John F. Kennedy, the president who had been assassinated 2 years earlier. Now, Mike Nichols knew Jackie Kennedy. I mean, they were friends. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. Jack Warner agreed to give him another week and a half of editing, and Mrs. Kennedy arrived. She was the other most famous woman in the world, by the way. I mean, you know, her clout equaled, if not exceeded Elizabeth Taylor's, because she was the First Lady of the United States for 3 years, and her glamour was indescribable. So she arrived. The movie was shown. She turns to Mike in earshot of the Monsignor and said, Jack would have loved this. And that turned the temperature down on their indignation, the production code's indignation at the words that were used in the film. Today, it seems so mild, it seems like nothing. But at the time, you couldn't use curse words in public. I mean, it was forbidden. And on television, you know, in films. So, and today, I mean, these curse words, it's pretty minor, you know, pretty mild. I mean, yes, they say there's no fuck you. There was a screw you that they turned into God damn you. Like that was another thing. They had to like shuffle the deck of cards of words they could use and couldn't use. You know, that was an argument that went on throughout the production. But anyway, so that was another example of Mike Nichols, you know, his own power and, you know, cultural hegemony.
Yeah, and it was only 2 years later that they replaced the production finally with the system we have now of ratings, letter ratings like R and
Right.
G, etc.
So the movie brought down the production code in effect.
Yeah, I mean,
Had
it
to
was sort of
stand it.
inevitable. It was as the 60s became
It was
the 60s. But that actually brings me to a part of your book that I especially loved, which was when you talk about the play coming out in 1962 when it was first staged on Broadway. You bring in two other literary works that came out around the same time.
Yes.
Richard Yates's novel Revolutionary Road, and Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, which of course was kind of the starting gun for second wave feminism. And
Right.
it's such a smart kind of literary comparison. Can you talk about
Thank you. Yes.
what you thought of those two
Yes. So
works in relationship to this one?
yes. So one of the things, one reason I thought the play. This will get to your point in 1 second. One reason I thought the play was so important and such a phenomenon, and why people were so receptive to it, despite the language and despite the alcoholic behavior, and was that until that moment in like 1962, marriage was presented to the American public in a kind of very anodyne, pablum-y sort of way. There was the public marriages were on television. Lucy and Ricky Ricardo, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, Ward and June Cleaver. I even threw in Burns and Allen, in the book. And also the romantic comedies at that time were, Under the Yum Yum Tree and Pillow Talk, and movies that were, they were all like, life was a fairy tale. It looked real, but it was all fake, and it was surface thin. This movie comes along, this play, I'm sorry, and reflects real life. And I think people were starved, like adults were starved for seeing real life, reflected back in a way that was intelligent and thoughtful and provocative, and all of that. So I realized that Revolutionary Road was published a year before the play opened on Broadway, and it won won something, the National Book Award, I can't remember. And here is an indictment. This novel is an indictment of kind of mainstream conventional marriage, mainstream convention, and also, the kind of typical marriage, kind of, fall in line, everybody has two kids, they move to the suburbs, and it's about a couple, the Wheelers, who, they swore when they got married that they were going to live interesting lives and do interesting things. And 7 years go by and they end up in Connecticut with a nice little house and two kids, and he commutes to work. And April, the wife, she's going crazy. She's like going out of her mind, like, I don't want this. Let's move to Paris. And she has this plan to move to Paris. And her husband gets cold feet. Anyway, so it's basically, it's an indictment of the way things are. And Richard Yates it's a great novel. Richard Yates is a wonderful writer, and so there's that. And so I sort of was thinking about that against Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and against marriage in general. And then I've always thought in some way, until I kind of actually thought this, but it was kind of bubbling up in me for a long time, that it is Martha's movie in a way. I mean, there's a volley back and forth, and it's equal, and it goes back and forth. But this was a moment where she stood up to her husband in a way that you never saw that reflected so much in film. And she did it. She acted out. She didn't do it elegantly, but she held her ground, to be sure. And at the opening salvo in the film, what a dub. And then she is trying to explain to George at the very beginning of the film, what Betty Davis's character was like. And, finally she says, she's discontent. And in that moment, and when you watch the film, she says it early on in the kitchen, right after she has this, like, takes this Rabelaisian bite, out of a chicken leg. She goes, she's discontent. And I started to realize that, that's the problem that has no name. And I knew that from The Feminine Mystique. I mean, I read it years ago, and I sort of remembered that was the condition that Betty Friedan had put her finger on at that moment in time, the problem that has no name. Women like the April of the Wheelers in Revolutionary Road was also manifesting the problem that has no name. It's like women were trapped in this condition, marriage, family. Not that family is bad at all, but the kind of prescription, American prescription of it was so uniform and claustrophobic, and it didn't allow women to have careers, to think outside of the ticky-tacky little house, all of that. And so I started to piece this together, and that's kind of how I kind of concluded that it would be useful and relevant to place kind of the play and the film in context of that time.
Right. I mean, well, we should start bringing in some questions. People are submitting questions, but I just want to bring this. You lead me to one of my favorite little passages in the book from the prologue. You say, "In Virginia Woolf, we are witness to a profound shift in George and Martha's marital orbit. Their body, vicious, painful, yet witty display of unharnessed human emotion reminds us of what lurks beneath the surface in our own lives." You talk about how this is ultimately a play and a movie about marriage. But what surprises me even more is that you also write at the end of that prologue, "It is still the truest rendering of love in marriage that I know," which is, I think, a more surprising reading, that this is a work about love, because it seems on the surface like it's more about hate.
Well, one of the epigraphs in my book is by Jonathan Franzen, and he says, "Don't talk to me about hatred if you haven't been married." And when you think about, marriage to me, at the core of all marriage, no matter nationality, geography, religion, class, two people come together and there's an attachment at the core, and that attachment drops very deep into like the core of each of us, and is close to the attachment we have to our parents as any relationship in life. Well, within that core of attachment is a complex of emotions that are constantly bubbling up. And even though there is a kind of cultural prescription for how to be, and couples make it a point not to bring their marriage and their arguments and their disagreements to the public arena, they still exist. And every marriage, I believe, people can be very civilized, and some marriages are more civilized than others, but arguments can, people can turn on a dime. You can go along and think that your spouse is, being tender and loving, and then you say something tender and loving back, and their tone of voice, their impatience, their whatever, come, like they make some flip remark and walk out, and you want to kill them. And even though that's often a fleeting emotion, but the dimensions of and the extremes of feeling that exist at that core level, a lot of people mature and they sort of come to like accept, the way things are, and they don't react to everything, but it exists, it's there, it's real. And that's my point, is that, I'm not saying everybody should behave and act on every feeling that surfaces, but you also by turns should not deny what's actually going on. At some point, you have to address, the displeasures and, the hurts and the slights and all of that. I mean, they add up and they come out in different ways if you're not attuned to the flow. Anyway, that's my point. And that's why I think the movie is so great, because I think this is an anatomy, it's kind of an X-ray of what really goes on kind of unconsciously, beneath the surface. And, not that one should behave like George and Martha. I mean, they are pretty, awful to each other, but they come back together at the end. And that's the point. At the end, the false marriage is Nick and Honey's. It starts out that Nick and Honey seem like a perfect couple, but over the course of this, ribald debauch of a late night nightcap, you learn that their marriage is a total fraud. And George and Martha have the more authentic marriage, and they're the ones who go upstairs and go to bed and you know, face the new day, you know, aware of the fact that, you know, things are not always so easy.
That's such a good point. All right,
So-
what are our questions?
Well, we've got one that I think is probably a head scratcher, which is, if you had to cast this picture today, who do you bring in?
I don't know. I think about that. Like as I'm falling asleep, sometimes I kind of think about that, and I just, it's beyond my, I don't know, beyond my imagination. Michael, what do you think?
That's tough. Oh my gosh, do we have like a Martha in culture right now?
I mean, I don't think we do, but something about you were describing her being at the height of her beauty and she's only 30, whatever, playing up, made me think about Emma Stone, which doesn't necessarily seem like great casting, but
Emma Stone could play anything.
You know, she'd give it a go.
But she could be a great honey, you know?
I mean,
I think she could actually.
Wait. How about Olivia Colman?
Who?
Could Olivia Colman be honey? She was great.
She's too old, unfortunately. I mean, she's brilliant. But Honey's
Martha's supposed to be.
Honey, oh, you mean Martha? How she played Martha? Oh, Olivia Colman? Yeah, maybe. Yes. She's great. Yeah. She would be perfect. Yes, absolutely. I thought you meant Olivia Colman was Honey. No, she'd be great. Emma Stone, I mean, I think she could play anything, to be honest. I think she's amazing. But I don't know.
I kind of wish. Sorry.
Just the idea of getting the cast of The Favored back together to have Olivia Colman and Emma Stone, throw Rachel Weisz in there for just a hot second. Why not?
Rachel Weisz could play. I don't know.
I don't know.
She could play the tree.
Other questions?
Tough one. I'm still not over seeing Kathleen Turner play Martha on Broadway.
Loved it.
2006. That was my first time seeing it on stage, and she's kind of the definitive Martha for me because I was
great
by that.
She was great. I loved her in it. Yeah.
Wow.
Other questions?
Well, I mean, I wanted to ask. I mean, you got into a little bit. This is Mike Nichols' first picture, and he is coming from being this theater wunderkind, but his ability to exercise such control over things like getting Haskell Wexler when he wants him, and the sort of behind-the-scenes machinations that he had to go through with the Hollywood people, I'm curious, do you feel like that was something he was able to do just because he was Mike Nichols and he was so charming and he knew everybody, or that he had learned on Broadway and could bring in, or did he just get lucky and know how to push all of the buttons in this giant corporation?
I think Mike Nichols was very, very smart. He was a student of human nature. And if you've ever, and I highly recommend listening to Nichols and May's skits. You can, I mean, there are albums of them, or you can. They're on iTunes or whatever. They were they were a phenomenon too. Nichols and May were a comedy team in the 50s, and they first came to New York in he grew up in New York, but they started the comedy routine in Chicago. They came to New York in 1957. They were 25 maybe. They became the most sophisticated, thing in New York City. They were like the hippest, coolest thing to go see in 1957. It's because they had a sense of irony. Yes, and they were just very droll, and they put their finger on kind of existential truths of kind of like daily life, conversations, and you just listening to Nichols and May, you understand how much they understood about human nature, psychology, all of that.
I think we just to wrap it up, since you're talking about Nichols and May, I am curious, do we have a sense of how, because not only was this his first picture, it was a giant hit. It was like, we can't understate what a meteoric rise this is for Mike Nichols. Do we have a sense of how that affected May in that moment? Do we?
She bowed out at a certain point. She wasn't interested in doing what Mike did. She had a daughter. she wasn't. She kind of they had a year. Nichols and May was on Broadway. I say was because they were a team. Was on Broadway for a year, and it was a huge hit. But they sort of burnt out. I mean, it's like it's very hard to do that, and they improvised a lot. So it was very hard to do that night after night. And I think she just wanted a break. And I mean, they remained friends, but they were not. They just stopped performing publicly.
Well, there's a new biography of her coming out.
I know.
But she didn't participate in it. I think she hasn't given a interview since the 60s.
Yeah,
No, I know. I'm looking forward to reading that. She's also brilliant. There's one. Can I just give you my favorite line in the book out of nowhere? But it's good. So when the Burtons were about to arrive in Hollywood to begin production, Mike was really insecure about Elizabeth's ability to play Martha. I mean, he fretted and fretted and fretted, and even after they started shooting, he was just kind of, she's never going to do it. She's never going to do it. And so that night, he called Ernest Lehman and he said, like, I'm just beside myself. If asking Elizabeth Taylor to play Martha is like asking a chocolate milkshake to do a double martini, to play it. I'm sorry. Asking, I just blundered it. Never mind.
Do another take.
Oh, okay. Asking Elizabeth Taylor to play Martha is like asking a chocolate milkshake to play a double martini. That's the line.
Speaking of which, I'm done with mine. So
you had your drink. I'm about to have mine too.
That's our time then. If this, the library talks last one martini. That's what Daniel always says.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much, guys. Both books are on the shelves now. Oscar Wars is recently in paperback. George and Martha is still in its first pressing. You've only come out, what, a month or so ago?
3 months ago. 3 months ago.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed this.
I've easily gone on another hour. I love this book so much, and it was great talking to both of you.
Okay.
Thank you. I agree. Both of you. It was a pleasure. Really.
Okay. Good night, guys.